Right, we're at 2 minutes past, so I suggest we kick off. A very good afternoon to all of you here today, and welcome to this webinar, which is titled Putting AI into Action, Bridging the AI Trust Gap. I'm Usman Ikhlaq, Program Manager for Artificial Intelligence at techUK, and I'll be chairing this discussion. As many of you will know, techUK is the UK's technology trade association with over 1,000 members, the majority of whom are startups and SMEs. We also do have a sizable, large organisations in membership too, some of which are on this call. This webinar is part of our Putting AI into Action webinar series, where we identify the barriers to AI adoption. But also looking to really maximise the benefits to it. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by a fantastic panel who will help me to explore these issues, which include Nicole from Darktrace, Nick from BAE Systems Digital Intelligence, Sarah from Pinsent Masons, and Pete from Cisco. And I might just pause for a second to allow them to introduce themselves. Nicole, would you like to go first?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm Nicole Carignan. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Cyber AI at Darktrace. I work for our Chief Strategy Officer, and most of my career has been in the cross-section of big data, data science, machine learning, and security. And we work toward our security strategy, but also our AI strategy for the next 12 months, 24 months, 5 years.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nicole. Should we go to Nick next?
Hello, everybody. I'm Nick Sinnott. I'm from BAE Systems Digital Intelligence, and I look after the AI strategic capability engine, in essence. And what my bit does is inputs to strategy and also looks after those brilliant people that deliver the actual technology itself, as well as looking at all the processes and policy and all that really interesting stuff that engineers really don't like to talk about. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Sarah, we'll go to you next. Sarah Cameron? Okay, no worries. We'll go to Pete, and then I think Sarah may join momentarily. Pete.
Okay, so a moment ago, I saw that, so she will be up top. My name is Pete Rye. I am a principal engineer at Cisco in the UK, and I work in a part of the organisation called Outshift, and we look at sort of emerging technologies and new business opportunities for Cisco. My background is in sort of large-scale enterprise data messes. Really, it's always a mess, enterprise data, and trying to sort of encourage people to embrace the mess, not to try and sort it all out, because that's impossible. And we do a lot of AI innovation and research. In fact, most of the stuff we do now is AI focused. We look at enterprise adoption problems mostly, which is very pertinent for this call, obviously. I'm also part of a large group in Cisco who are working on our responsible AI strategy. And if you search for Cisco responsible AI framework, you'll find the outputs of that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pete. And I've noticed that Sarah has joined the call. So we'll go to you next for an introduction.
Hi, Usman. Sarah Cameron. I'm a legal director from Pinsent Masons, the law firm, and I have a particular focus on data, Internet of Things, AI, and digital twins. And I sit on techUK's AI Leadership Committee. So I hope you could hear me this time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the panel for joining. Before we jump straight in, just a few house rules. So as you may have noticed, this session will be recorded. I ask that attendees, if you're not a speaker, please do turn your microphones and cameras off and do use the chat function for questions, and we'll field some questions towards the end of the session. Right, we'll jump straight in. We are going to explore the drivers of distrust, but I think it's really important to first contextualize where we are and to outline what AI trust is and why it's important. So very much keen to hear from the panel on that. Nicole, I might start with you, if that's okay. Keen to hear your views, including possibly from the cybersecurity angle. So I'll yield the floor to you and looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Wonderful. I mean, as everybody else in every other industry, AI is really revolutionizing our industry, and it's really important for trust in order to be able to achieve speed and accuracy of detection, response, and remediation. And that's really the big difference between the adversarial innovation of AI versus the defender's innovation of AI is it really comes down to trust. Adversaries can adopt AI without needing to worry about accuracy, security, safety, bias. They can use a jailbroken large language model to facilitate malware script generation that has package hallucinations, that's inherently interjecting vulnerabilities into their operations, and it doesn't matter. They can use it to get that productivity gain, to get that speed, to get that scale, and we have the barrier of trust in order to be able to adopt it safely, securely, and accurately. So as we are pursuing this concept of AI trust, we need to be looking at privacy, accuracy, interpretability, control, and security.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nicole, and completely agree with your thoughts. And it's really important that systems are reliable, fair, aligned with the user expectations, and it definitely sort of feeds into the need for clear guidelines, bias mitigation, and so on. So thank you for touching on that. Sarah, I might go to you next. I know that you've got a few points in relation to responsible, safe, and ethical deployment and development of AI models. So we'd be very much sort of keen to hear from you on that, along with other thoughts. So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, so principally for me, confidence really comes from responsible, safe, and ethical development and deployment, as you say. But what does that actually mean? I think it boils down to trust in data, its provenance and quality, because after all, well, as 𝗔𝗂𝘁𝗁 would put it, that's the feedstock for AI and AI systems. And then in terms of people, it comes down to trust in the competence of developers and deployers, and they're having appropriate AI strategy and ethical values in place, and policy and process applicable throughout the life cycle of the AI systems. So what we're talking about effectively is overall governance and accountability that meet accepted principles, standards, and regulation as they're known and accepted and have been discussed for a long time. And I think just in terms of why this matters, obviously we're trying to unlock innovation, but safe innovation. The UK has a productivity problem. We need to stay competitive on the global stage, and we have global challenges to solve that we need to do together on an internationally cooperative basis too.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Some very good points, and certainly address the need to ensure that as AI continues to evolve, response continues to evolve, it's adhering to ethical guidelines. So thank you for touching on that. Nick, I'll go to you next. Obviously keen to hear about your views in relation to what safe and secure looks like. But yeah, I'll yield the floor and I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I think the way I like to describe it is it's actually trust as a human condition. So in order for us to trust in something, if I'm, I need to feel safe in this relationship that I have with this machine, I have to understand what are those red flags, what should I be incapable of ignoring in order to actually use this system? And ultimately AI, as I said, is about people. And unless, of course, once we reach ASI, yeah, then the focus might change entirely when we're looking at it from a species perspective. But I'm thinking, about the safety and security. I think both Nicole and Sarah made excellent observations there, really. But it's down to that, how can I want to have an expected outcome from this machine? I want to be able to see what goes in, what comes out, and how I can then work out what that means to me as a human being, whether I'm going to be providing it, delegating agency, decision, or authority, whatever it might be. I need to actually intrinsically understand what's going on under the bonnet. That's a really difficult thing to do, because bearing in mind we're dealing with technologies that sometimes probabilistic, deterministic outcomes, you're not necessarily going to get that. So yeah, it's an interesting question when you're looking at penetration testing for these models and trying to discern actually how they work is a massive undertaking. And I'm sure Pete will go into some of the infrastructural requirements and some of the other elements which you need in order to actually justify this trust. Yeah, I'll stop there.
All right, so yeah, some good insights. I do like your point about agency, decision, and authority in relation to delegation, because I think trust really has to be grounded in reliability and transparency in order for it to make sound decisions and ultimately to ensure that decisions that are taken ultimately do align with values that humans have. So I think it's really interesting food for thought. Fantastic. Well, that takes us on to our next question, which deals with the leading causes of distrust in AI within organizations.
What about Pete? Usman, what about
Pete? Oh, sorry, Pete. Apologies.
That's okay.
Sorry, Pete.
I won't take it personally. I'm not going to rise to Nick's debate about infrastructure and connectivity, although I'm sure Cisco would like me to, but I think that's a sort of a given. And I could wax on about responsible and ethical use of AI, because we have a lot to say about that to Cisco, but and we've done a lot of good work. But I'm going to sort of take a bit more of an engineer's standpoint here, because it's my day job. So I think when we talk about trust in AI, it's important to understand a few things. First of all, there isn't just one type of AI. There's lots of different types of AI. And there's currently a kind of a focus on generative AI, especially text-based generative AI, but that's not the only type of AI. And as time goes by, people will come to understand more different types of AI and what they're for and what they're not for. I think there's a kind of a lack of understanding of that right now, but that will improve over time. Also, it's important to understand we haven't reached any kind of plateau on AI. It's not like we've got to the end. Yeah? We're still climbing Mount AI. Okay, and I'm not even sure we're near the top yet. It's going to get better, it's going to improve. Outcomes are going to become more and more impressive as time goes by. So trust is a moving target. Like trust in the current set of technology and the current set of outcomes it generates is only a transitory thing. Those outcomes will change over time, and they'll encroach more and more on kind of human level actions. So you can't really sort of bottle in trust right now, I think. There's kind of, the way I look at it, it's kind of three modes of AI. There's a kind of a mode of AI as an assistant, which is we see with ChatGPT and others, where it's answering questions and helping you with daily tasks like summarization or generating reports, etc. Then there's augmentation, where it's working with you. So you're doing it together. So there are things like Copilot and others where you're typing and it's offering suggestions as you go. And I think these are the two we're most used to now. But eventually there's autonomy. It's just when you give it something to do and you trust it to get on with it. You don't interfere with it. You just say, can you do this for me? And you just trust that it will get on with it. And this autonomy, I think, is where we're heading. And that's not to say that assistance, augmentation, and autonomy it's not like I don't want to present it as a kind of chain. All of them will exist forever now they're here. So we'll be using all of them. But the last one is the one that we know least about, but the ones we're going to have most trust. I'm talking about letting AI get on with consequential outcomes, with business critical outcomes, with very little human oversight. And people will find themselves, worrying about such sentences. But these are the kind of things we're going to have to grapple with. Because in the future, it's better to think of AI as one of your employees, and the AIs in your company will be amongst the most able employees. And you don't spend time sitting on your able employees' net watching what they're doing. You tell them things to do and you trust them to get on with it and you give them autonomy. And that's the way we're going to have to start thinking about these autonomous AIs that are emerging almost as we speak now in the coming months and certainly in the coming years we'll see these kinds of. So trust is a very difficult thing. It's not as simple as just what's happening now. It's what's about to happen. I think that's the important thing.
Thank you, Pete. Really insightful thoughts, and I do like your focus on the use cases and also the sort of potential for AI to achieve massive productivity gains, but ultimately the need for human agency and ultimately to ensure that ultimately if AI is deployed, it does meet your business objectives. So thank you for that. I did think we sort of wrapped up that question a bit too quickly, so apologies for jumping the gun, which takes us on to the next question. So thank you for that. So the leading causes of distrust in organizations. I think it's quite a broad subject matter, but I think there are a couple of buckets which we can certainly touch on. Pete, I think you touched on parts of it in your last answer, but we'd be really sort of keen to learn more about the sort of uncertainty in terms of what that means, in terms of its impact on people, roles, but also the lack of awareness and possibly what could be done. So I'll yield the floor.
Sure. Okay. So uncertainty is absolutely the right word. There's a huge amount of uncertainty in the enterprise about what AI means, and I don't think that uncertainty, I don't think that fog's going to clear like for a while yet, because the technology itself is evolving, and I think even the people building it are uncertain. I'll be honest with you, where it's heading. It's kind of got. I mean, I think it's not. No one's driving it. We're all driving around the road and discovering what's happening as we go along. I think, including the people building it. So there's uncertainty about. First uncertainty is when to deploy it or how to deploy it. I think a lot of businesses have done the most obvious thing, which is to shove a chatbot on the website. It's like, why not do that? That's like the most obvious thing to do, and that actually works very well. We saw Klarna saying that one chatbot replaced 7,000 call center staff, quite astonishing. So that's like an obvious thing, but that's really just the very simple end of it. So uncertainty how to deploy it, but also uncertainty when you deploy it, to get most benefit, you have to bring your own data, and then you have to bring your own functions. And so there's uncertainty about how you would do that, because most enterprise data isn't in a fit state to bring it into play. There's also uncertainty about when to deploy, because there's no technical stability. Things are emerging all the time, so you don't want to jump too early and then overinvest, but you don't want to jump too late and have your competitors get a march on you. So it's very hard to know when to make that sort of leap. And it's an expensive leap. So when you do it, it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's not obvious where your return on investment on that is going to be straight away when you make those investments. And there's another uncertainty, which is a more softer one, which is AI is sort of strangely pervasive. It's not like other technologies which you can sort of box into one department. It sort of leaches its way through an organization, and it forces data sets, peoples, and processes come together that had no earthly business to be together before. And it works best when everything is integrated and provided to it. And so it has a kind of pervasive reach into an organization. And I think people are, again, uncertain about what that means for their people and their processes. It's hard. It's not like deploying technology. It's much more like deploying whole teams of super sort of able consultants to come in and sort of sit around your organization doing stuff. It's better to think about it that way, I think, because it's quite difficult to see how it would fit in. And then on top of all that, we have things like, obviously, accuracy and reliability, which is not great at the moment, I'll be honest with you. In some of the generative technologies, you have things like security and intellectual property leakage issues, etc. So these are more humdrum, but nevertheless quite important. I'm sure Nicole can call them humdrum. More sort of day-to-day issues about security, intellectual property, accuracy of results, etc., etc. So they're all in the mix as well. So lots of uncertainty for a business, I'm afraid. And we see now businesses. I don't see businesses embracing it at the level you thought they would have done, because I think a lot of people are a little bit reticent about when to jump and what to do, and everyone's playing with it, but it seems like everyone's fiddling around the edges a little bit right now until no one's sort of waiting to jump straight in at the moment. Well, somewhat, but the vast majority of people are kind of doing little bits here and there, so I see.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, some really interesting thoughts, and I suppose uncertainty could be a barrier to adoption in itself to some degree. I think if you look at some organisations, there's still a lot of uncertainty as to what is AI, how should I deploy it? Will a particular model go out of date, let's say within 6 months? If it's adopted in the wrong way, then will that leave a bad impression? So yeah, it's definitely some interesting food for thoughts. And I suppose in terms of actions, antidotes to uncertainty, possibly workforce initiatives to really train individuals to really upskill and reskill so they obviously have the skills for today but also for tomorrow. I think if you sort of look at graduates as well, the sort of jobs they're plugged into, it could be those sort of admin tasks which ultimately will be phased out. So what does the future workforce look for? But it could also be an opportunity to really showcase positive use cases, positive applications. So yeah, some interesting food for thoughts.
Just on that point, awareness is very important. Raising awareness of these technologies will become vital at all levels. And we kind of, on the skills side, we're kind of moving into a post-STEM world, I think, where there's such a big focus on STEM, but I think we've kind of got going a little bit beyond that now with these technologies. But awareness is very important. I agree with you. And awareness, it's not important that everyone understands how it works. Awareness about what it's good for, what it's bad at, when to trust it, when not to trust it, how to get the best out of it. These kinds of awareness issues, I think, quite fun.
Yeah, I completely agree where it could be, best used and where, let's say, more work is needed. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Sarah, I might turn to you next. I know you've got quite a few thoughts and statistics to possibly share, so I'm happy to sort of hand over and yeah, to be in listening mode.
Well, I guess, I mean, causes of distrust is going to vary to some extent on context. But can I just pick one, which it might count as humdrum according to Pete's list, but we'll see. So one of the stats I came across and was rather shocked by was that 82% of organizations experience bias issues dealing with data and models in the context of AI. So let's just take bias for a minute, because we hear all the time, don't we, stories about bias in healthcare. So, for example, systematic allocation of less care to Black patients than white patients, despite them having similar medical conditions. Bias in recruitment, where men are selected over women because of historical patterns of recruitment or language in CVs, and adverts being targeted at men for highly paid jobs, and one could go on and on forever. But I think the point I want to stress is it may be a cause of mistrust, and that may be a barrier, but there are plenty of resources to help organizations mitigate this risk. You won't eliminate it, because you won't eliminate bias amongst humans, let alone with AI systems, but you can mitigate this risk to help encourage and enable adoption. So to just sort of trot off a few, and there's a lot, take the World Economic Forum's procurement guide for AI in the private sector. It has a really helpful table of questions to walk through and ask during the procurement process, and recommendations for how to establish ethical principles and values. Take NIST, its risk framework has an accompanying playbook with activities to achieve bias mitigation. You've got the DCIT portfolio of assurance techniques that techUK helped to establish, with some 35 to 45 case studies on bias audits and how to address this. Open source tools on the Alan Turing Institute site. And I could go on, because there's the ICO guidance, there is existing standards and more being developed to help implement the EU AI Act. And in some places we're seeing actual regulation too. So New York City requires third-party audits wherever employers are making automated decisions in the employment space. We've got Lord Clement Jones proposing regulation in the public sector around automated decisions, and so I could go on. But I think essentially, if organizations document their approach and build in safeguards, technical and organizational, to address and mitigate risk, it shouldn't be a total barrier to adoption of AI systems.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, some interesting statistics, and I suppose on the data point, again, I think we talked about uncertainty as being a barrier in itself. Data quality and the sort of lack of data governance structures within organizations, that's sort of another significant barrier to widespread AI adoption. And so I think there's certainly scope for organizations to implement those structures to ensure that there is explainability, transparency, and so on. But I think that's definitely an area where I could say more should be done. Yeah, I think we can certainly talk about data at length. So yeah, thank you for that, Sarah. Nick, I might go to you next, if that's okay. I think you have a few points to mention in relation to input and outcome, but also what it could potentially mean for the workforce and some other points. So I'll hand over to you on that front.
Yeah, no problem. I'm not going to go too much onto the explainable and transparent element, because I've probably already mentioned that right at the beginning. But certainly moving up from system vulnerabilities, and this is certainly something I'm sure Nicole is very, very aware of, as we're in similar sort of businesses looking after nation states, trying to engender that trust. Now, the thing is, with what causes distrust, in my experience on the companies that I've dealt with and with what customers are doing at the moment, it's very much about vulnerability. What is this technology going to expose me to? I want this capability, but actually, what is it going to expose me to? So if you just look at some of the findings coming out of Black Hat 2024, for example, and I'll just mention this because it's Microsoft enterprise products with Copilot, and they're talking about it's a real eye opener. You know, being able to essentially punch holes in Copilot, manipulate it, remote Copilot execution or remote code execution. I realize that, but remote, sort of Copilot execution. Where the external hacker has full access to all your data. So yes, I think it's very much that distrust around what is it going to expose me to. Bearing in mind, a lot of my customers, they're obsessed about security. So naturally, that's on my own experience. That's what we're seeing with our customers, and that's what they're worried about. They're worried about risk amplification as a result of that as well. So, for example, again, going to Sarah's comment about if your data is not in a good state, you are going to be surfacing risks that were existent in your hello, sorry, somebody spoke. Yeah, you're going to be surfacing risks really, really, really rapidly. So you are going to have access to information that was previously hidden because it's been incorrectly labeled or whatever it might be. You accidentally popped it into SharePoint and gave everybody access to it. Before you know it, it's been surfaced throughout your organization. So I think it's about, and then I'll go on to the job displacement thing a little bit. And I've seen this in companies as well, where automation is impacting certain job roles. But that's actually not the problem. What they've done is they've brought in automation, but actually they haven't changed the processes. So things actually end up being more complicated. And that actually and then, of course, going to Pete's comment the other day that he was talking about is that return on investment side of things. He's saying, well, hang on a second, I just spent a whole lot of money here. And actually, I haven't sped up my processes. I actually can't show much for what I'm doing at the moment. So I think, yeah, so from a job displacement as well, impacted and more vulnerable people within your organization. I don't mean vulnerable in the big, with the big V, but I mean older workers or people with the lower skills who will find it harder to transition to new ways of working. And I think Pete alluded to this, is it's going to take time for this to bed in. It is a spectrum of technologies. Yes, generative AI is very much in vogue at the moment, but actually being able to use this in whatever guise it might be, as he said, as an assistant or whatever the other technology spectrum, sensors, etc., whether you're looking at a rules-based system or something that is, like a large language model where you're going to be getting lots and lots of lovely summarized text, and hopefully it's all fine and nobody's done any rag poisoning on you, and you haven't ended up with an example of somebody providing information served up for you. And then I think the one thing that I wanted to mention, other people are very worried about, and Sarah brought it up, is around the legal implications and safety. So clearly our customers are worried about safety and does the product do what it's supposed to do, and does it operate within parameters? Now, maintaining those parameters through life is very, very difficult to do. It's difficult to do when just on a piece of engineering, but actually doing it for a system where it potentially is at the edge or in sort of another use case becomes a massive issue. So there is a certain element of distrust there as well, particularly when you start heading towards the autonomy space, where actually you're relying on the machine to make independent decisions. You're not going to end up in The Hague as a result of that. So again, it's more the legal side of things coming in there, and then finally, of course, is actually using it within your business processes as well, and the legal ramifications of that, indemnification of output. So it's all very well that you're using a code generator, but is that going to end up, that output suddenly bite you in the backside later on, saying, actually, you've just used a whole wodge of my code over there, it belongs to me, and you've used it. So yeah, sorry, I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I'll start rambling.
No, absolutely. Thanks so much, Nick. Yeah, some really, really good points. And I think on the sort of job displacement front, I suppose there is scope for organisations to essentially have awareness campaigns, sort of talking about what AI is, how it can augment your work, your behaviour in the workplace, as opposed to taking your job, and ultimately how it can be an assistant. And I think it's certainly important to address the sort of concerns regarding AI use and displacement, but also to then showcase the opportunities of widespread adoption across teams, because it's not just a piece of technology which is used by IT professionals anymore. It's going to be used by everyone. And I think if we think about democratization, the individual's interaction with AI right now might be the odd use of ChatGPT, but within 5 years' time, it could be different. It could be in healthcare, in terms of diagnosis and so on. So yeah, I think immense possibilities to touch on. So yeah, thank you for that.
But I'd just like to make one point there, really, and that's part of what organizations should be doing when they're looking at that capability development, is very much bringing people on board, which is a way, as Pete said earlier, is actually the way to gaining the trust is actually showing people how to use the system in the first place. So yes, having training programs right from the very top all the way down to the bottom, basically.
Definitely, thank you. Nicole, I'll go to you next. Obviously, security, robustness, accuracy, and control, but also very sort of interested to hear more about this from the sort of cybersecurity angle. So yeah, I'll hand over to you.
Well, yeah, as we've learned through lessons of new technology revolutions over the last decades, is security needs to be embedded at the beginning and not an afterthought. So we need to bring in our security teams and embed them with our development teams. NCSC and CISA put out great guidance of secure by design, which is the adoption or the deployment of AI, may it be external AI or internal AI, and it's keeping the security teams in every step of that process. Sarah mentioned this AI risk management framework. I think it's a great guidance for the testing, evaluation, validation, and verification process, which is key and critical to overcoming some of those distrust issues with the operationalization or productization of intelligence that comes from machine learning, and exhaustively testing it. This is red teaming it. This is, as adversaries have kind of started with a new era of adversarial machine learning, which is attacking the machine learning models themselves. This is a new thing in the last 2 years. And so exhaustively testing it, exhaustively red teaming your deployment of machine learning to ensure that you're not only getting the outcome that is expected by a human, but you're also testing how it could potentially be abused and misused. I think where the gap is, though, is really there's no framework or guidance on the data integrity process. So we have to go back to basic data science principles, which let's start with the bias issue that Sarah came up with or brought up. You need to have a very diverse data science team with very different lenses of perspectives as you're going through your data integrity process, as well as your testing, evaluation, validation, and verification process. You're able to ensure that the data is just, fair, without bias, not harmful, with different types of perspectives, because my perspective alone will not get the exhaustiveness of a fair data set. So diversity in your data science programs, as well as going through exhaustive data integrity process to ensure that you're starting with the best data possible. And then going back into the full life cycle of the testing, evaluation, validation, and verification process, you're talking about interpretability. And this is like really what has stopped people from productizing or operationalizing machine learning. And they're still kind of in the tinkering stage because they don't know how the models came to their conclusions, so they don't know how to take action on it. And I've seen some really creative ways to try to get to interpretability, which may or may not be the best routes. But I think it's kind of key and crucial to be transparent with the type of machine learning techniques that you're using. What are they good at? As Pete mentioned, what are the strengths and limitations? Generative AI or large language models is really just good at semantic analysis. And so understanding the appropriate use cases on how to productize and use that. And then in our case, so we are pushing toward autonomy, mainly because we know that adversaries are going to be able to augment their attacks very fast and at scale, and you have to be able to contain an incident and mitigate it, buying the human defender's time. This isn't going to replace the humans. Like I kind of put it, human around or human out of the loop with unsupervised machine learning techniques, with a layered approach. It's key and crucial to have that transparency, interpretability, but also that control piece, that post-processing, the operationalizing the intelligence puts the human around the loop. And that way you can control and build trust with the output and how it should be operationalized in an autonomous fashion, just to buy humans time to come in and again, provide a more exhaustive investigation and more exhaustive remediation. And that comes with humans validating that output through that process, the human around the loop, but not hindering them from a time perspective or a speed perspective. And so there has to be a control vehicle. There has to be those additional safety and security mitigations put in place so that we can build that trust and adoption to get there.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I think the concept of human out the loop is quite interesting. Certainly one to explore for greater risk management and more oversight. So thank you for that.
Well, and can I make one more point to that? Because so what machine learning does is it just processes more data to facilitate better data-driven decision making. And so I always think about this in the terms of like displacing humans. And I like the term that Pete used, it's augmenting them, because in the security sector, when you talked about detection, response, and specifically remediation exercises, a lot of it was based on a hunch. A lot of it is, I have this amount of data right here. I'm trying to piece it together based on these specific hypotheses. This is how I think I'm going to mitigate it, then like remediate it. But a lot of it is a lack of data is provided during that very fast, intense time. And so why not use machine learning to augment the data retrieval process to allow to facilitate better data-driven decision making in a very stressful, very high stakes, very quick turnaround time frame. So it will definitely be, even in autonomy, I think you're still going to see an augmentation to humans to just facilitate better data access and make better decisions.
Thank you, Nicole.
Can I just comment here on
of course.
a related point we're talking about? I think it's important to make a distinction with the different types of organizations, because I think there'll be organizations that are building AI, and Cisco is one of them, and are making AI-enabled services. And those kinds of organizations absolutely need to be knee-deep in all the issues around security, the bias issues, all the bias mitigation. You need to be liaising with all the organizations that Sarah enumerated. And obviously, again, Cisco, if you go and look at the Cisco Responsible for AI framework, you'll find a whole model for how organizations can do that if you're building AI. But the vast majority of enterprise customers eventually will just become clients of other people's AI, and they won't be building their own AI. Now, this creates a funny set of other problems in that you have to put trust in the organization you're buying the AI off, that they've done all those things, they've done the bias mitigation and the security and everything, and then you're handing over your data to do fine tuning or training on that data. So you have to put trust in their aspects. And I think for those types of organizations, the uncertainties are more about who to choose, when to do it, when to make that, when to sign a contract, when not to. And it's not just about generative AI. You might be like a large scale manufacturer, and somebody might say, well, I can do predictive maintenance or fault detection, traditional machine learning style use cases. But in order to do that, you have to hand over data, you have to control, you have to hand over autonomy, you have to hand over processes, you have to invite them in to your network, you have to invite them into your business processes, you have to train your staff. This is this is more of the kind of adoption problems I was talking about, as opposed to the people building it, which I wasn't trying to underestimate. I was saying it's humble, I mean, it's my day job. Those problems are immense as well, and are also emerging over time. So it might be useful to sort of think about different types of customers and different types of enterprise in different ways. So I think different problems for different groups.
Yeah, completely agree. I think it's certainly not a case of one size fits all. So it's important to, again, get into the detail, understand who the particular customers are, and ultimately, the different types of organizations. So thank you for that. One of the ways in which we're trying to put AI into action as part of this webinar series, which I'll shamelessly flag once more. Fab. Okay. If there are no other additional comments on that, I think we can move on to the last question, which deals with what can organizations and government do to tackle these issues. So yeah, bit of a tough one, but certainly lots of food for thought. So Sarah, I might start with you. I know you've got a few thoughts in terms of what's already going on, what's already in motion, and I think you've also referenced those sort of data points. So happy to hand over to you and hear more.
Oh, thank you. Well, so much to say, but can I just pick 4 points? AI literacy, delivering on government rhetoric, international cooperation, and business to business doing intelligent contracting. And I won't bang on for hours, but just a few points on each. So we've talked about awareness, and we've talked about capability, and we've talked about teams and engaging all sorts across the workforce. So in order to establish effective governance, engaging the right stakeholders, you need AI literacy. And it's interesting because I'm not a huge promoter of regulation, but one of the first parts of the EU AI Act that's going to be applicable from February next year is around literacy. So developers and deployers are going to be required to provide their workforces adequate insights and training and education that sure will vary according to their specific roles and the context of use of AI, but they need to ensure that education so that compliance and enforcement is achieved under the Act. So we're seeing businesses thinking, help, we've got to comply with the EU AI Act literacy provisions. And that will really help drive the effective governance that we've all been talking about. So the question is, in the UK, what more can we do to achieve this sort of AI literacy? What more can we do to promote the awareness and the uptake of all the assistance that's out there that we've discussed already and that Nicole, Nick and Pete have been talking about without necessarily having rigid regulation around it? So that's one point, because I question to what extent is all this free assistance on the DSIT portfolio of assurance techniques or the DRCF's hub giving free advice, how much of that is actually being taken up by those that could benefit from it? The second point is on the UK, the new government, and it's really encouraging some of the positive rhetoric coming out from Peter Kyle and Keir Starmer in these first days and weeks of being in power, talking about putting the public sector data to good use, having a coherent data access policy, a national data library, and so on around more data sharing to address and improve public services and transform the NHS. Great rhetoric and very encouraging, but as Tony Blair says in his new book on leadership, leadership means acting and not just analysing, and it means resolving the problem and not just articulating it. So can we see them deliver in one term, for example, digital health records for every citizen in the UK, which according to a Tony Blair Institute health study is perfectly feasible? Can we see them accelerate the one login service already established to enable digital ID verification across all public services? Because what we're seeing in Europe is a €2 billion investment in data sharing, data spaces, Interoperability Act, the Health Data Space Regulation, all sorts of other regulations to enable access to all leading public services across 27 member states by 2030. Now, if they can do that across 27 member states, we really ought to be able to achieve significant progress in this country. Thirdly, very briefly, because I think Nick might touch on this, but international cooperation. We may have different approaches to regulation or principle-based approach in different countries, but we are seeing increased international collaboration around standards, around conventions and frameworks on safety, on a hardening and a stance to Gen AI, on the new Council of Europe Framework Convention on Human Rights and so on. The more we can see and encourage this, the more it will enable businesses to navigate that patchwork and undertake, adopt AI in a confident way. And then finally, because I think I've talked for too long, I could talk for hours about responsible, intelligent approaches to contracting between vendors and suppliers, and being able to use all the tools out there to assist with this. But this is about what type of AI system are they dealing with, making sure that everybody understands capabilities and limitations of the AI systems they're seeking to procure, having a sensible approach to what is actually achievable, because if you have specific outcomes and specific governance requirements, that's easier to deal with performance-wise than having vague terms around reasonable standards of care and skill. Things can go wrong even if there is reasonable standards of care and skill. And then we could talk for hours about intellectual property, indemnities and warranties. But if there is a grown-up approach to contracting using all the assistance out there, then one can establish fair risk and reward, an appropriate approach to some of the challenges, governance and otherwise, that come with adopting AI.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Nick, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, sure. Sorry,
Well, we have a great relationship with governments in the security community because for the past 2 decades, that has been innate to the cybersecurity community. It's a long tradition of knowledge sharing and threat intelligence sharing between government and commercial organizations. We are very aware that the cyber war goes much further beyond governments, and that it's commercial entities that are looking to innovate quickly and fastly to empower organizations to protect them. And that comes a lot with collaboration and sharing. So just keeping that up, which I think many of the organizations or the government organizations in the UK and the US and others are very good at that sharing. But taking a step back, and some of the things that are, I'd say, almost urgent to tackling these issues first and foremost is establishing guidance on data privacy and data integrity. Because I think that's where a lot of people are throwing out the principles of data science on the altar of innovation. And it's important to bring that back because privacy matters. And that's ultimately one of the biggest risks when it comes to adopting AI is how is my data being used? What data is being used? Exposure of data leaks and so forth. So privacy matters. And I like that a lot of organizations you're starting to see kind of have the approach that we do, where we believe that data residency and data privacy are paramount. So we don't want to suck your data out to big classifiers in the cloud and risk the potential data exposure or data leakage that are there. It's important to bring your machine learning to your data so that you have control over how the data is used. You have residency. You can go through the data integrity process, the cleansing of the data to enforce privacy guidelines and guardrails. So I think that's really paramount and important. And then from a security standpoint, as we are moving into a very different threat landscape with adversaries innovating with AI, our dependency on cyber threat intelligence is going to change drastically because adversaries have tools to quickly change their IOCs, their signatures, their hashes of their tools, their infrastructure. So our dependence on these more big data sets are going to dwindle, but we're going to move toward behavioral TTPs, changing of adversarial behavior. How do we capture that? How do we share that as a community so that we can better protect and enforce against that? So we're going to see, as a result of adversarial adoption of AI, a drastic shift and change in cyber threat intelligence. And what is that? And how do we better protect other organizations with the innate new types of cyber threat intelligence we have? So we're a behavioral analytics organization. That's where our AI comes from. So really understanding across domains too, how those behavioral patterns are changing so that others can better defend against it as well.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Nick, I'll go to you next.
There we go. Switch my mic on so everybody can hear me. I think, yes, Well, I was going to mention quite a lot what Nicole mentioned over there, but I think I'm probably just going to focus in on some of the, sort of the stuff that I've seen in companies and what they can actually do. There has to be a clear strategy on how you're actually going to deploy the technology. I think Pete said this and Sarah as well, and how you're going to do it within your organization. And of course, governance comes up again and again and again. Data governance is absolutely critical because it is literally all about the data, as Nicole said. It is all about where you put that data, how you're going to put it there, and having organizations to help you to manage that AI value chain, supply chain of being able to realize those insights at the end, is absolutely fundamental. And also having an effective business change and support of any sort of AI implementation is absolutely critical. You can't forget about the people. You can't just go, oh, and there you go. And it goes for any new technology. Pete would have seen this over the years, I'm sure, as would others having worked in this industry. It is fundamental. You mess up the business change bit and the people don't use the tools. They misuse them and you end up with all sorts of problems. And AI introduces even more threats and risks, as Nicole has quite has articulated. So effective organizational governance also goes to the assurance regime as well, and how you actually handle security, how you deal with it as a whole. Capability and skills development, we've already mentioned that. I'm not going to go down that. And also a review of your operating model as well. That needs to be really considered because this is actually going to change how you do business. So how are you operating at the moment? How are you operating business to business? How are you how are you dealing with your clients and your customers? That's going to change as well. You have to bear that in mind. So I think it's the preparation, it's the readiness for actually having this technology will build trust, because you'll know I've done this. My data's in the right place. I think it's secured. I can see whether I'm building it, whether I'm refining it or buying it off the shelf, where my IP strategies may exist across that spectrum, and I know that I can manage it effectively, and I know exactly what to expect. I've hopefully shored up enough governance and structure and order, those human controls to get me into a good place. And then finally, I will mention just briefly the effective governance regime interoperably globally. That is happening. There's lots and lots of sort of harmonization that's happening around the planet, which is good news, because before all we had was ethical principles. Now fortunately it's been codified in legislation, regulations around the world. And then, of course, yes, maintaining that human control. However, I would encourage everybody on this call to read 𝗂𝘂𝘁𝗁 latest book, Singularity is Nearer Than You Think. Have a look at that and have a think and ruminate on that one. So I'll stop there.
Thanks. We've had quite a few book recommendations in this call, so yeah, do keep them coming in. Pete, I'll go to you.
Sure. Okay. Let me go quite quickly if you want to have some questions as well. So first of all, I agree with almost everything the other people have said. Absolutely yes to AI literacy. We need more of that, and we need to get better at that, and we need to make it better. A better distinction between people building AI and people using AI, because I think most of the stuff has been towards people building AI, and we need to, as I said, move to kind of a post-STEM discussion now. Absolutely yes to international alignment on rules and standards and acceptable outcomes. The more we do international on that, the easier it will get for everybody, certainly in the Western market, perhaps not including some of the other some other countries, I won't name. Absolutely yes to more cooperation around security. I completely agree with Nicole on that. We need better ways of sharing information about AI threats that are emerging. These are happening on will happen on grand scale. So international alignment and cooperation is very important on that, I think. And Darktrace is a great product. And I'll be shocked if I don't mention Cisco Talos and StealthWatch and others, which are very complementary and work well with Darktrace. But the government, let me say something for government. I think government really needs to lead by example here, because they have the most to gain. The potential benefits from AI in the public sector are absolutely immense. So I'd really like to see, this present administration lead by example, get on with deploying AI in all sorts of use cases for, to get better outcomes for taxpayers. I take a slightly different spin from Sarah, I think. I don't mind what Sarah said, but we must put all our focus on central adoption of AI, one login. We must let individual NHS trusts, individual school trusts, public sector bodies, quangos, we must let them explore AI for themselves, even if that means fusion in the early stages, because that's, I think, where most benefit. But if we're going to do that, they have to have a really intelligent discussion about job displacement because it's going to be an issue. So, it needs to be handled. But if the government could lead by example, I think that would really put everybody forward. So hopefully, I have other things to say, but I'll stop there for time if you want to take some questions now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pete. Conscious of time, I think we may have time for possibly 1 or 2 questions. So going over to the audience, if you have any questions, there we are. Feel free to unmute yourselves and put your questions to the panelists. And yeah, we'll start with Callum.
Yeah, so there are quite a lot of answers today talking about risk and risk management. From my kind of experience seeing that happen in organizations, still really struggling with the basics of getting risk management even vaguely coherently right. So, given the increased focus and increased demands because of how much easier and how much kind of more approachable AI systems can make these risks, how easier it is to get to that point. Does anyone kind of have any worries about the maturity of risk management techniques and the ability of organizations and enterprises to actually realize them?
I don't mind jumping in there. There's 2 components to that. So there's the additional risks that need to be mitigated with the adoption of AI or the AI to be used to help with risk management. And I'm going to focus on the latter first. Again, machine learning is processing larger volumes of data, and our risk mitigation efforts have been very data-driven, but mainly very manual. If you think about threat vulnerability management and risk reduction exercises. So machine learning to understand what are the actions that could actually reduce the risk of an organization the most, could have the biggest impact to assets that are exposed or the most vulnerable or critical or could cause the most damage. And so we look at it as using machine learning to get that valuable intelligence to do the prioritization of which threat vulnerability mitigation actions could have the biggest impact on your organization. And again, that's just massive processing of a large volume of data to get you a very valuable intelligence to take action on and really hopefully improve the risk score of an organization. So I think machine learning could definitely help out with risk management there. And that's actually one of the areas that we've been innovating a lot in to facilitate better cyber resiliency across our entire, like an organization's entire digital estate across multiple domains. Let's go back to the former. So the adoption of AI is causing risk of itself. And MIT just put out an AI risk registry with over 700 plus vulnerabilities that need to be evaluated and identified. I think the biggest obstacle there is just AI asset discovery. So understanding how AI is used throughout your entire environment, having that visibility, and then going in there and being able to mitigate all the risks associated with it. And so I think that needs to be now enveloped into the risk management portfolio immediately, specifically with visibility. And then you're moving it down to detection, response, continuous monitoring, auditing, all the things that you would normally do for a good cyber resiliency program, but it needs to be applied to the models themselves, the APIs, and the data corpuses.
Thanks, Nicole. Unfortunately, we are out of time, sadly, which brings us to the end of the session. Apologies to those who were not able to put questions direct to the panelists, but I just want to thank the panelists for their insightful thoughts, and obviously to the audience for joining us today. There are more webinars to come. They'll certainly be on the horizon, and we'll have a recording on our website very soon. So we also welcome feedback on the webinar. So if there's any way that we could do better, please do let us know. And on behalf of techUK and indeed the panelists, thank you very much for dialing in today, and we look forward to seeing you soon. So thank you for your time, and goodbye. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.